When he woke up and tried to stand, he immediately fell to the floor. His right leg wasn't bearing weight like a leg was supposed to. As soon as he attempted standing, it crumpled beneath him, as if it had no muscles or bones. Sitting on the floor, Stanley touched his right thigh and felt nothing. He slapped it, then punched it hard with his fist. Still nothing. The arm and hand he had used for punching were numb too. What was happening to him? Was it some kind of degenerative disease that might leave him in a wheelchair for the rest of his life? But if it was, wasn't it kind of strange for a degenerative disease to progress this rapidly? Maybe going to the walk-in clinic hadn't been enough. Maybe he should let Melissa make him a doctor's appointment. He probably needed to see some kind of specialist. Even if the doctor hurt him, it couldn't be worse than what he was feeling now. He wondered if, like his dad, he had already waited until it was too late to get help. With great effort, Stanley turned around, put his hands on the bed, and pulled himself to standing. He walked in a slow shuffle, dragging his right leg behind him and letting his left leg do most of the work. How long had it been since he had eaten or drunk anything? He couldn't remember. Water. He at least had to have water. He shuffled to the kitchen, still clean from Melissa's efforts, and got a glass from the cabinet. He filled it with water from the tap and tried to drink. Agony. Swallowing even a sip of cool water felt like swallowing a ground-up glass. He retched over the sink, bringing up water pink with blood. He had thought he might try to heat up some soup, but if he couldn't even drink, eating was out of question, and the very thought of swallowing anything hot was unbearable. His phone rang, making him remember, miserably, that he had left it in the room. He dragged himself toward the insistent ringing, but by the time he got there, it had stopped. The caller ID said Mum. He knew what she was like. If he didn't call her back, she would automatically think he was dead. Hello? Stanley? She answered on the first ring. Hi, Mum. Stanley tried to make his voice sound normal, but it came out husky with a little mouse-like squeak at the end. You sound terrible. Yeah, people keep saying that. He lay down on the bed to talk. No need to waste the energy it took to sit upright. Melissa came over to pick up the kids after she was at your place last night. She said you were a wreck. That's nice to hear. There was nothing like knowing your mum and your sister had been talking about what a loser you are. It's not something to joke around about, Stanley. His mum was using her stern voice, the one she had mastered when he used to get into trouble as a kid. She thinks you need to go to a doctor. I went to a walk-in clinic this morning, Mum. The nurse wrote me a prescription for some pills. They've just not had time to work yet. I'm gonna be fine. He didn't really believe he was going to be anywhere in the neighbourhood of fine, but he didn't want to scare his mum. She had gone through so much fear and worry when his dad was sick. She deserved to live the rest of her life in peace. Melissa also says she thinks you should get out more, see more people. Once you're better, of course. She says you're lonely. She's probably right. It's hard. I'm not over Amper yet. He felt a lump forming in his already painful throat. Just what he needed to cry to his mummy. Of course you're not over her, sweetie. It's only been 2 weeks, but over time your heart will heal and there'll be somebody else. Somebody who appreciates you for who you are. I know I'm biased, but I never thought that Amber was good enough for you. You know, I never thought I'd date again after your father had died, but a year and a half later I met Harold. You have to admit Harold's a really nice guy. He is, Mum. Stanley hadn't wanted to like Harold at first. He'd felt like it would be disloyal to his dad's memory. But Harold was good to his mum and kept her from getting too lonesome. They went out to dinner every Friday night. On Sundays they walked in the park if it was sunny, or in the mall if it was rainy. They always held hands on their walks, which Stanley thought was sweet. He was glad they had each other. Now, do you need me to come over there and bring you some soup or some groceries or something? His mum asked. "No thanks, Mum. I just need to take my medicine and rest." He didn't want her to see how bad he looked. He knew if she did, she would be dragging him to the emergency room. "Okay, but I'm gonna call you tomorrow to check on you. And if you need me to come over, I will." "Thanks, Mum. And if you're not better by the day after tomorrow, do you promise you'll let Melissa make you an appointment with her doctor?" He knew it was no use to argue with her. Melissa had inherited her stubbornness from their mum. "I promise. I love you, Stanley. I love you too, Mum." Saying those words made him feel sad and vulnerable. If he was going to be this sick, he almost wished he could be a little boy again. He could stay in bed in his jammies and his mum could take care of him and bring him hot tea and chocolate pudding and comic books. Nobody took care of you like that once you were an adult. After he hung up, he knew he couldn't stay on the bed. If he did, he would pass back out and not make it into work. With one hand on the wall for support, he limped into the living room, fell onto the couch, and turned on the TV. Supposedly he was checking sports scores, but he couldn't focus enough to follow them. He just stared blankly at the lights and colours on the screen, thinking only of how much his throat hurt and how fast his body was failing him. It was like he had turned into a decrepit old man overnight. All too soon, it was time to get ready for work. When he pulled on his uniform pants, the right leg was too tight. It looked weird having one normal pant leg and one that squeezed his thigh like a pair of ladies' tights. His uniform shirt was still in a ripped up pile on his bedroom floor. He decided he would just wear his plain white t-shirt to work and then try to find a replacement uniform shirt in the storage room when he got there. Or not. What did it matter? No one saw him there anyway. He could go to his work in his underwear, and nobody would be the wiser. Since the prospect of walking to work seemed impossible, he decided to take the bus instead. The short walk to the bus stop was difficult enough, and once the bus arrived, he could barely lift his numb and swollen leg high enough to step into the vehicle. He could feel the people behind him shifting from foot to foot and waiting impatiently. As he stumbled onto a seat, the other passengers looked at him with concern. He sat down next to an older lady who got up and moved to another seat further back. He probably looked like he had something contagious. When he reached his stop, he pulled himself from his seat with great difficulty and lurched towards the door. He stumbled stepping down and fell onto the pavement. The fall should have hurt, but his arms and legs felt nothing. The absence of pain was more frightening than normal pain would have been. "Are you okay, buddy?" the bus driver asked. Stanley nodded and lifted his numb right arm to wave him off. He knew he wasn't okay, but it wasn't like the bus driver could help him. He didn't even know if a doctor could help him at this point. He was pretty sure the antibiotics weren't going to do the trick. He grabbed the bus stop signpost and used it to pull himself up to a standing position. He was unsteady on both of his feet. He reached down and slapped his left leg. He felt nothing. He should have told the nurse in the walk-in clinic about the numbness in his limbs. What had he been thinking? He staggered and stumbled down the sidewalk. Passers-by stared, some seeming worried, others just annoyed, like it inconvenienced them to see another person suffering. He made his way into the storage yard and held on to stacks of lumber for support as he tried to propel himself towards the stairs that led down to the facility. He grabbed the stair railing with both hands and focused on taking one painstaking step down at a time. His progress was too slow and he was afraid of clocking in late, so he finally sat down on a step and scooted down on his bottom step by step, like his nephew when he was a toddler and scared of the stairs. It wasn't dignified, but it got him to where he needed to go. He passed the stinking bio-waste bin. At least his nose still worked. That was something, anyway. By the time he scanned his ID badge and the groaning door opened, Stanley was so exhausted it took all of his concentration to simply put one foot in front of the other. He had thought he might go to the storage room to find a fresh shirt, but looking professional no longer felt like a priority. Rest, that was his only priority. He dragged himself to the security office, scanned his ID badge, and collapsed into his chair, panting like a sick dog and sweating profusely. He was in no condition to be at work. He was in no condition, period. Looking down, he saw that his right leg and left leg were now equally swollen. stretching the fabric of his pants so tight it was in danger of ripping. Everything felt tight. His swollen arms, his swollen legs, even his chest felt tight. Was this what it felt like to have a heart attack? Could he be having a heart attack? He would call Melissa in the morning and tell her to go ahead and make that doctor's appointment. No more messing around with walk-in clinics and antibiotics. This was serious, and now he was less scared of doctors than he was of this illness. Amber. He kept thinking of Amber. When she broke up with him, he had just stared at her stupidly, too much in shock to say much of anything. There was so much he could have said to her, so much that he needed to say. What if he never got the chance to say it? With shaky, sweaty hands, he dug through his desk and found a pen and paper. From some emergency reserve of energy deep within himself, he wrote, "Dear Amber." With his numb arm and his unsteady hand, the words looked like they had been written by a second grader, but he couldn't let that stop him. He kept on writing. "Do you remember how we first met in the grocery store? I brought my stuff to your register. You checked me out, and all that time I was checking you out. I was too nervous to ask you on a date, but I kept coming to the store and buying things I didn't need, just so I could see you. Finally said, 'Do you like me or something?' I think I blushed, but I said yes. And you said, 'Then why didn't you ask me out?' When I did, and you said yes, I think it was the happiest I've ever been. Amber, I know I wasn't always the best or most exciting boyfriend, but I want you to know that I truly loved you, and still do. I've been really sick lately, and if you're reading this, it's probably because something bad has happened to me. Please don't feel sad for me. I just want you to know that I'm sorry I didn't make you happier and give you what you needed. But it wasn't because I didn't love you. I do, and very much. I wish you lots of happiness in your life, as much happiness as you brought me when we were together. Love always, Stanley." There, that was it. He was no poet, and his handwriting looked terrible, but he had said what he needed to say. Trembling and exhausted, he folded up the letter and put it in his pocket for safekeeping. When he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, he didn't doze off as usual. Instead, he passed out, as if somebody had hit him in the head with a baseball bat. When he regained consciousness, he felt shaky and sweaty and tight. Tight is the only way he could think to describe it, like somehow his body had been stretched to his limit. His pants were stretched, snug across his legs, and now his t-shirt, roomy, when he had put it on just a few hours before, clung onto every bulge and contour. But it wasn't just the clothing that was tight. His skin felt tight too, as if it might burst open like the peel of an overripe fruit. The ballerina doll was on the desk. He was in no mood to play. He didn't pick it up. He didn't even want to touch it. "I like being close to you," it said. "Sure you do," he mumbled. But then he thought, wait. He put his face in his hands and tried to make some sense of his confused mind. Doesn't the doll only talk when you tilt it over? Before, it only talked when I tilted it over. Maybe I didn't really hear that. Maybe I'm so sick I'm hallucinating. "Take me home with you," it said. Stanley knew he heard it that time, but he didn't answer. One of his many recent problems was his tendency to talk to inanimate objects. Melissa was right. He needed to get out more. All this solitude wasn't good for him. He was already worried about his physical health. He didn't want to have to worry about his mental health too. But why was the doll talking if no one was activating it? Maybe it was broken. Maybe there was some problem with the mechanism that caused the voice activation to shut off. Whatever the cause was, Stanley didn't like the effect. "We like you," it said with that same little giggle that he had once found charming. With a shaking hand, Stanley picked up the doll to inspect it. Maybe there was a switch he hadn't noticed before that controlled the voice mechanism. Maybe he could turn the thing off. The doll was missing an arm. Strange. It had been intact the night before. "What happened to your arm?" Stanley asked. "Take me home with you," the one-armed doll said. No. He had said that he wasn't going to talk to the doll anymore, so why was he doing it? For some reason, the doll didn't seem so cute anymore. He couldn't say why, but the thought of having it in his apartment was terrifying. He wasn't so crazy about having it here either. Stanley remembered. that when he had handled the doll the night before, he had noticed a tiny scratch in the paint job on his face. Tonight, the scratch wasn't there. Another night, he remembered now, he had noticed that there had been a small tear in the doll's tutu. Tonight, as it had been last night, the tutu was fine. "We like you." We. Suddenly, Stanley understood. It hadn't been the same doll on the desk every night. It had been a different doll every time. Sure, it had been the same type of doll, but there had always been slight differences. But what did it mean? Whatever it was weird and upsetting, and he didn't want any part in it. He opened a drawer in the desk, dropped the one-armed doll inside it, and slammed the drawer shut. There, out of sight, out of mind, after he saw the doctor and got whatever these health issues were straightened out, Stanley decided he was going to look for a new job like Melissa was always encouraging him to do. She said they were always looking for good security guards over at the courthouse where she worked. That way, he could work in the daytime and actually see people and talk to them. Maybe he and Melissa could take their lunch breaks together sometimes. If he worked days, his schedule wouldn't be the opposite of all his buddies anymore, and maybe he could start hanging out with the guys again. He could invite them over to his apartment, which he could keep clean, and they could order pizza and watch football together. Who knows, he might even start dating again. He would start by asking Katie out. Even if she turned him down, asking her would be good practice, a step in the right direction. As soon as he got his health back, a job at the courthouse could be the solution to all his problems. It would be a sunny, sociable workplace. Not like this one, all dark and creepy and lonely. Sonny thought about the future and felt a small sense of hope. He told himself that he wasn't going to fall asleep again. He was going to do his job. The screens were called monitors because he was supposed to monitor them. But his body, for whatever bizarre medical reason, had stretched beyond his limits. An exhaustion overtook him. His head lolled back as he slumped in his chair, and his eyes shut. He descended into blackness. He was in a dentist's chair. The dental assistant was a robot outfitted as a ballerina. Unlike the little dolls, her face was painted to look feminine and pretty, with long eyelashes, pink lips, and pink circles on her cheeks. Her blue metal hair was sculpted into a ballet bun. She hovered over him, holding what looked like several wide belts. "We have to strap you in," she said, her voice feminine and sultry. "The doctor doesn't like squirming." She bound Stanley to the chair with leather straps around his shoulders, his arms, his legs. He wanted to move, wanted to fight being restrained, but he could not will his body to act. He was paralyzed. The dentist entered wearing dark safety goggles and a surgical mask. Stanley was leaned back, his mouth open, his hands in a white-knuckled grip on the chair's armrest. The dentist was silent and rough and was trying to stretch Stanley's mouth to open wider and wider. No, Stanley was saying in his head, "Stop! It won't open that wide! It can't!" The dentist reached up and tore off the goggles and the mask. The face Stanley saw was a clown white mask with big black eye holes and a black gaping grin. Yellow glowing irises shined through the black eye sockets. The face. He knew that face. The thing's hands pushed his mouth open wider and wider, wider than he could stand. His lips were going to split at the corners. His jaw was going to break. Stanley woke up, but the feeling of stretching didn't stop. That face in the dream, Stanley knew that face. Stanley was distracted from his thoughts by a sensation on his own face. There was something moving on his face. The ballerina doll was standing on his chin, using her one arm and one of her legs to try to stretch his mouth open wide enough. Wide enough for what? Stanley's heart raced as he finally understood. Wide enough so she could fit inside. Oh, chills. Stanley raised his numb right arm and swatted the doll away. She was light and sailed across the room, hitting the wall with a thud and landing in a crumpled heap on the floor. He braced his hands on the desk to pull himself to his feet. As he stood, He felt a tightening in his arms, his legs, his belly, his chest. He knew now that what he was feeling was the sensation of dozens of tiny limbs pressing on his skin from the inside. Inside his arms, his legs, his chest, his belly. How many of them were in there? The sore throat had started after the night the first doll appeared. No wonder it hurt too much to eat or drink or anything. Night after night the dolls had been climbing into his mouth and down his throat as he slept, making their way through the narrow passageways of his body like explorers in a dark, damp cave. The realization nauseated him. He felt the urge to vomit, but there was nothing in his stomach to bring up, nothing but acid and fear. He wished he could go back to not knowing what was wrong with him, to just thinking he had contracted some unusual virus or infection. People always said that when it came to physical conditions, knowing was better than not knowing. In this case, they were wrong. Knowing was much, much worse. Stanley staggered out of the office and down the hall. Everything in his head screamed at him to run, but he was too weak to run. The walls of the facility seemed to be closing in around him. He had never liked this place. He had to get out of here for good, he told himself, and he would do it even if he had to crawl. The pressure inside him was the building. It felt like the dolls were angry, like their many tiny fists were punching him and their many tiny feet were kicking him. But he saw the exit sign's green glow up ahead. Green means go, he told himself. If he could just get out, if he could be where there was moonlight and fresh air to breathe, he could figure out what to do. He leaned against the wall and hobbled to the exit sign. Outside, he tried to take a breath of fresh air, but instead sucked in the stench from the biowaste bin. He was so worn out and ill that he just wanted to lie down on the pavement, but he had to figure out a way to make it up the stairs. Up the stairs and into a cab and straight to the emergency room, where he would tell them, "What? There are dozens of little dolls living inside me. They crawl down my throat when I sleep." There was no doubt what ward of the hospital a statement like that would land him in. But maybe if he could convince a doctor to take an x-ray, they could see that the dolls were real. Voices. Stanley's thoughts were interrupted by tiny, muffled, little girlish voices. They were muffled because they were coming from inside of him. From his left arm, "I like being close to you." From his right leg, "We like you." From his belly, "You're so warm and squishy." Stanley stumbled backwards, almost falling. Standing was becoming more and more difficult. The pressure was building inside him, becoming unbearable. He felt like he might explode. Could that happen? Could a person actually explode? The tiny one-armed doll was standing framed in the facility's doorway, posed like she was about to do a pirouette. The yellow irises of her cavernous black eyes focused on Stanley like lasers. Her smile was wide. She tilted her head in a way that under other circumstances might have been cute. "Isn't there room for just one more?" she chirped. All of Stanley's strength was gone. He fell to his knees. The one-armed doll leaped toward him with the grace of a ballerina. Stanley couldn't help it. He opened his mouth to scream. Oh my god, okay. That is great. That is such a good... That actually might be one of my favourite stories in the series so far. It was kind of unexpected, but I guess, like, I had a few theories halfway through that I didn't want to say. I definitely thought, obviously, these mini 𝓑𝓮𝓫s, which are the dolls in this case, they are definitely doing something to him. And when I realised that all of his body was numb, I was like, it has to be them. They have to be inside of him or something, or like, because we know from the other two stories that the second story in each book is always about like body swapping, and this follows the same theme, which is very interesting. But I really like it. This is a really good story. Good ending too, I reckon. And actually, I think it was quite a short story. I'm pretty sure. But yeah, what do you guys think of it? I will be doing more audiobooks in the future. I think the next one I'm going to do is the next book, or the next story, sorry, The New Kid. I have no idea what this is about. But yeah, once I've done this one, I will do literally all of the Fazbear Fright stories so that you guys have all of them to just listen to and look at. But I hope this helps. I hope you enjoyed. I really enjoyed this story. What do you guys think of it? What theories do you have for it? I'm going to make a few theory videos soon. And yeah, I guess I will see you later. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.